Hi, everybody. I just wanted to welcome you to Civil Beat headquarters. This is a sold-out event, despite the fact that there are a few seats empty, so some folks may be straggling in. And as you guys know, we will also post this online within 72 hours. I'm Amy Pyle. I'm the editor-in-chief here, new to Hawaii as of September, so it's great. Every one of these events, I learn new things from all of you and look forward to having some time to chat after. A couple of nuts and bolts. Restrooms are out the door to the right. Somebody will let you back in. We promise we won't leave you locked in the bathroom. Skip, where are you, Skip? I saw you a minute ago. There he is. Yeah. Skip is going to be the one who can take a card from you for questions rather than passing around a mic, since we have such a big panel. That's how we'll handle it, but we'll try to make sure that we get through most of your questions. I think everybody got their validation for parking as they came in, but if not, anybody in a green shirt, Civil Beat, can help you with that. And actually, what am I forgetting? Is that everything? Oh. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, and obviously there's food, and please don't leave it here, because in a newsroom, none of it will be left at the end of the day if you don't eat it. So, yeah, we're recording. Right, that too. And Chad's going to introduce all of our guests. We have a lot to get through today, including a bunch of questions that have come in ahead of time online from the folks who weren't as lucky as you to get in. So, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Amy. A round of applause for our editor-in-chief. As Amy had indicated, we will be posting this online later. This is not live in the sense that we are not broadcasting, but do be civil. Please don't make a scene, if you will. We were in Kona during the election moderating a panel with the two mayoral candidates, and we had a little scene. I think we ended up editing that out, but you know how some people will take advantage of a televised broadcast event to say that we don't do that. We try not to have that happen. First of all, let me welcome our guest, Honolulu Prosecutor Steve Alm, Dr. Jerry Busch from John A. Burns School of Medicine, I should have checked with this earlier, Fuimaono-Poe. Close? Not bad, okay. May is a nurse practitioner, founder of the Malie Cannabis Clinic. And then David Tarnas is a representative from the Big Island House Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs Committee Chair, Waimea area, correct?
Yes.
Got it. And then Nikos Leverenz from the Drug Policy Forum of Hawaii. Thank you very much. I did want to say, if we could have added another panelist, I would have included somebody from the hemp industry. Hemp is something that hasn't got as much attention regarding cannabis policy. We do hope we can talk about it. The legislation that's pending at the legislature does have hemp in there, last time I checked, but it's not fully part of it, but this is my ignorance. David probably will be able to correct me on that one. But I would like to have included that more. The hemp industry has felt somewhat left out, but I know the lawmakers have reached out to them. I do want to say this is very informal. It's a talk story. We're not here to give formal speeches, but to hear what each other has to say, and we can interject and have a nice free exchange. The questions were submitted in advance by our readers, and we got over 30 last time I checked, and I've got most of them right here. So keep in mind, I'm asking questions from our readers. They are not necessarily from me. Some of these are my questions, but this is primarily driven by our audience that people want to know. There are bills still moving at the legislature, including on medical cannabis and hemp. And if I have this correctly, Senate Bill 1613, this is the counterpart, the companion to House Bill 1246, the bill that Rep. Tarnas authored that was shelved earlier in the session, does have decision-making scheduled at Ways and Means and Senate Consumer Protection, Commerce and Consumer Protection next Wednesday. If I understand how the Senate works, on second reading, they don't even take testimony because they've already heard it. So a decision will be made on the recreational marijuana cannabis policy bill. It's very similar, at least as initially drafted, but there have been some amendments in SD1, and that is scheduled for Wednesday. And if I read it correctly, the SD1, as of January 1st, 2026, recreational pot would be legalized in the state of Hawaii. Again, with the caveat, as the bill is currently drafted. Friday is the deadline, a week from today, the first decking deadline right before crossover, because we're nearly at the halfway point of the legislature. Please silence your phones. Please be civil to each other. As Amy said, be sure to eat and drink, because she's not joking. The reporters and editors will be faced to take that food home with them because it's a long weekend. And then afterwards, we may not fill the full hour and a half. My guess is a good solid hour. I do know a lot of you folks want to gum up afterwards and talk story with our guest and other people in the office. So hopefully we'll just kind of see how it goes. So without further ado, I'm going to give each of our guests just a couple of minutes to make some opening remarks. I'll follow up with a few questions, and then we'll get to the questions that have come in. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of them, a lot of interest in this topic. David, can we start with you? Top of mind in terms of cannabis policy for the state of Hawaii.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this forum today. My name is David Tarnas, State Representative, and I chair the House Committee on Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs. I was asked by the House leadership to work on a bill to address the issues in the legal medical cannabis industry and the legal hemp industry, as well as provide a solid regulatory framework for legalizing adult use of cannabis in the state of Hawaii. And so we've worked on that very diligently. I have a wonderful staff, Sean Aronson, who is the attorney for the Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs Committee. And we worked with, last session, we had a bill that was actually developed by the Attorney General in consultation with us and others. That bill did not move forward. So we had the opportunity to make amendments and changes to that bill. We introduced a bill this year, House Bill 1246, and it has the Senate companion as well. And in this bill, we're taking the lessons learned from other states around the country and what are the best practices. And so combining all of the cannabis industries, hemp, medical cannabis, and adult use cannabis in one regulatory office was something that other states recommended. So we made sure we did that. The proposal that we had in the House bill, which is currently in the Senate bill, is to create a Hawaii Cannabis and Hemp Office. It would be administratively attached to the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. It would authorize the office to issue statewide licenses for adult use and medical markets, as well as for hemp manufactured products that include THC and CBD. Currently, if you are aware, the medical cannabis industry is struggling. The hemp industry is struggling. We need to do something to protect these legal industries to ensure that people in Hawaii have access to medical cannabis. It's interesting, if you think about it, the way that Hawaii actually went about legalizing medical cannabis, it was in a step approach. It was kind of not really rational, but it was in a step approach. I think it was in 1999, I think, was when it was actually created, legalized as medical cannabis. But it wasn't for over, 17 years later that the legislature created the dispensary framework. So the legislature doesn't always do things all in one fell swoop, and it may be the same with the efforts that we're doing right now. We were unable to get the House bill through the House. I thought I was able to address the concerns of those who are opposed to it, but we didn't. It looked like we weren't going to have the votes to move it off the floor. Leadership decided rather than have a vote, we'll just recommit it to the committee. I requested of the Senate that they pass the companion bill over to the House so that we could have another chance to work on it. The House Speaker had asked me to work with the three other committees that have been referred the bill. So it's Agriculture, Consumer Protection and Commerce, and Finance. So I'm working with the chairs of those three committees to find a path forward. I think it's important to look at that, and Chad, cut me off if you...
No, please continue.
I think it's important to look at adult use of cannabis as one would look at any other products. I really would like to have adults make their own choice, informed choice about using cannabis. I recognize that when you use cannabis, you shouldn't be out driving. Yes, it can have health impacts. I mean, good heavens, alcohol has lots of health impacts. That's legal. It has a lot more harmful impacts than cannabis does. So I think it's important to look at the experience in other states. When there has been legal adult use cannabis, the data shows that cannabis use by minors has gone down. I know that the opponents are saying, oh, it's gone up. The data does not support that. Let's be honest. Let's use facts when we talk about this. And so I think it's important to be discerning as the public to listen carefully and make your own decision about these things. Let me just wrap up by saying that we really need to focus on addressing the wrongs that have been inflicted on our community by the war on drugs, which has failed, so that as we move into this program, we really do have a social equity program, so that those who have been negatively affected would be able to have opportunities to participate in a legal cannabis market. Expungement and clearance of records for those with records for cannabis offenses has to be part of this. We're pursuing that not only in the bill, but also other measures we're moving through the legislature. Medical patients need to be protected. We need to ensure that those who are in need of medical cannabis have access to it. We need to make sure that the youth do not use this. This is why it's for 21 and older. But it's also, we need to educate adults about wise use, about safe use. You don't want to drive when you're stoned. And so we need to make sure that we have a strong public education program that's actually launched and well along the way before first day sales of legal cannabis. And I think we also need to make sure that we protect the rights of the public, so that I included in the bill is that you're not allowed to smoke in public places. And so we do need to make sure that this authority has the ability to create cannabis consumption lounges and other places where people would be able to go in addition to your own home. It has enforcement in the bill, and we need to address enforcement to prevent illegal grow operations. We need to, and so that's where the focus is really on preventing money laundering and organized crime from coming in. One last point is, the bill really focuses on protecting the Hawaii market. We want to make sure that we are prepared. So when the federal government does whatever they choose to do, which is kind of difficult to predict, then we need to be prepared so that we don't have a flood of products from other states in here. We want to protect the Hawaii market. And we're making sure that there is multiple licenses that are available so small businesses in Hawaii will have the opportunity to participate. We currently have real problems in this state. There's THC, high THC hemp-derived products that are currently being sold illegally in the state, and there's no enforcement action against them right now. We need better enforcement, and I'll leave that to others to talk about why that's not happening, but we need better enforcement. This bill provides the ability to do better enforcement. The availability of hemp-derived high THC products is really harming the medical cannabis industry and the hemp industry. We must address that. It's not being addressed right now by law enforcement and prosecutors. We need to do a better job.
Thank you, David.
So, thank you very much, Chad. I've talked too long, but thanks very much.
We discussed earlier, I emailed everybody and said, look, we're going to use the bill as a starting point. You know, it's so interesting. When we planned this, the House bill was alive. Then it got killed, as David said, and then the Senate bill is alive. I have two follow-up questions, and then we'll go to Steve. My first question is, what's that like to be on the House floor, this bill that you've worked on for a long time, and suddenly two of your colleagues who actually voted for HB 1246 in committee, then change their mind 2 days later? What's that like as a lawmaker to be caught, if you were alive, when something like that happens?
Yeah, Representative Todd and Representative Quinlan didn't change their mind. They were doing their job as majority caucus leader, majority leader, putting a motion on the floor. What they were doing was going through the process of recommitting the bill. This happens in the legislature. I mean, I first got in the legislature 30 years ago. It happens on the floor. This is not the first time. It's a way of telling the legislators who are working on this bill is not ready to be voted on. So you're going to get a second chance. Recommit it to the committee and give the chance for the legislators to look at a different bill and then vote on that. So while I was disappointed, this is a legislative process. You know, things take a long time. Significant legislation takes years to pass in the legislature. So while I was disappointed, this happens at the legislature. I have to maintain a positive attitude and move forward.
Last question, following up on that point. If Senate Bill 1613 does cross over, you guys are going to get back essentially the same bill. Mind you, it has been amended. Is it automatically dead based on what happened with the House bill?
I've been asked to take the Senate bill and modify it, amend it, so that I can address the concerns of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee Chair and the Finance Committee Chair. And so I'm in discussions with them right now and other members to figure out how we do that. We will schedule a hearing for it. It's likely to have the same referral, and I intend to offer a House Draft 1 of the Senate bill that makes the changes that I hope will address the concerns of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee Chair and the Finance Committee Chair, so that we can have more success moving this forward.
Thank you, David. Steve Alm, you have the floor.
Okay, and it's so good to be here and not to have just 1 minute to testify, which is what we get when we go to the
Turn on your mic, Steve.
It's on. And so
Go ahead and say what you just said, because
Yeah.
everyone should hear that.
It's nice to have a chance to talk about this in a little more detail, because at the legislature, it's busy, they have a lot of people. You get 1 minute to testify, and you have no chance to follow up when other people say things that are not true. Now, I'll take what was just said. I think Senator Quinlan, a House member, they looked at that. They didn't have the votes, which is why they killed it. They're busy. They have other things, money, everything else. So they realize, let's spend time on bills we can actually get an agreement. So I would expect when it comes back to get the same results, unless there's been some behind-the-scenes kinds of pressure or something that would change it. Now, just to respond to a couple things that were said by Representative Tarnas, there's no way he's going to be able to come up with answers to address our concerns, because what you're doing is legalizing a powerful drug and sending the message, now powerful drug, and sending the message to our kids that it's safe. It isn't. It is, and that's one of the challenges here. For some adults, it is recreational. But for many others, it's going to give them depression. It's going to increase the suicidal ideation. We're going to have more fatal car crashes. We can see that in other states. HPD has no way to test for marijuana. And even if they were able to get a search warrant and draw blood, it'll show the presence of marijuana. There's no agreed on correlation between this amount of marijuana and impairment driving like there is with alcohol. So, what the representative said about looking at data and research and facts, I totally agree with. And there were a couple of people testifying at the last hearing on the fact that some states have shown a decline in use. Well, Nora Volkov is head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. She was the lead person talking about that. Well, last month, in January of 2025, she came out and wrote about that and realized that the methodology was flawed, and so you cannot look at trends from then. So this is the latest information. What Representative Tarnas is saying was accurate up until last month, and now Nora Volkov has disputed that. In looking at marijuana, when I was a judge for 15 years, I was more focused on meth and coke and alcohol. That was causing people problems. If meth was their biggest issue, we would say, you know, no alcohol and no marijuana. We want you making good decisions. But it really wasn't that much on my radar screen. But then when I did my own research, and I would encourage you all to do your own research from credible sources, not from industry sources, like with cigarettes, but with credible sources. And I discovered there are a host of problems with the marijuana of today. Back when Representative Tarnas first introduced the bill 30 years ago, the THC content of marijuana was 3 to 4%. You know, that is Woodstock weed. People would smoke it occasionally, maybe on weekends with friends. There were only 2.5 million Americans who were daily or near daily use. They count that 21 days or more in a month. Okay, fast forward to now and recently. The average potency of marijuana sold in stores is 20 to 40%, with concentrates over 95%. The marijuana of today is nothing like the marijuana of 30 years ago. It's just a totally different drug. And it's associated, credible research shows it's associated with a whole host of problems that I had no idea until I actually did the research. And this includes, among other things, teens, young adults, older folks, their use increases. There was a huge study done and reported last year, reported on in November, showing states that have legalized teens age 12 to 17, 13% more use. Young adults, 18 to 25, 22% more use. And you have problems like psychiatric disorders. And I'm so glad we have a doctor from the medical school here to actually give you the facts of marijuana use from a medical perspective. You have depression, suicidal ideation, schizophrenia. You have increases in fatal car collisions. As one of the House members put it, a drunk driver is dangerous. A drunk and stoned driver is even more dangerous. You have increased emergency department and hospital admissions. You have impaired cognitive and memory functions. You have chronic vomiting. Seriously, that is a huge problem for the folks that are doing it. You have an increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. And for the daily or near daily users, that is like 40% increase in your chances of getting a heart attack or a stroke. You have increased calls to poison control centers for children who have eaten marijuana edibles because they look like candy or sweets. Okay, fast forward to 2022. Now, there's 17.7 million daily or near daily marijuana users. That's up from 2.5 million in 2000. That means those folks are during the week smoking and then or taking edibles or however they're going to work or they're going to school. Or they're watching, Netflix all day, whatever they're doing. When they're daily users, that is the main focus of their life. Now, it has now passed the number of daily drinkers, which is 14 million. So there's 17 million daily marijuana smokers. Now, of the folks that do smoke marijuana or use marijuana in America, 40% are daily or near daily users. 40%. And following the Pareto principle, which I'm sure, the 80-20 rule or however you guys have heard of it, those users account for 80% of all the marijuana sold in the United States. So when you're talking about passing this bill and they say it's adult use, but you're telling kids, it's safe or it wouldn't be legalized. And they're going to get their hands on it just like alcohol, just like cigarettes. Following that, though, they get 80%. So if this bill is passed, the way it's going to make money, whether tax or use something else, is from those users. They're going to be the ones buying most of the marijuana from the marijuana stores.
And just checking on our time here, I want to be roughly
I'm
equivalent
just
here.
about done.
Steve, I think your minute is up.
Do we really want to be in the addiction for profit business? Because that's what it is. Do we really want to teach our kids that's a good thing to do? I hope not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And by the way, I should just let you know, Steve, you may not have noticed, but while you're talking, David's going like this. And David, you may not have noticed, but while you're talking, Steve is going like this. And I do want each of you to be able to follow up later after we get through with our other opening comments. We will go to Nikos next, and then to Jerry, and then to May. But real quickly, Steve, two things. I know you've heard this. You've mentioned this in your remarks. If alcohol and tobacco are legal and taxed and regulated, why not pakalolo?
Well, I don't think there's any question that at least...
Microphone.
Oh, yeah. At least, as we know right now, alcohol is causing tremendous problems in society. Why add another powerful drug that's going to cause problems? So in many ways, I think that argument is totally irrelevant. Not totally, it's irrelevant. Because yes, it's a problem. Tobacco's a huge problem. And they've done a good job of trying to reduce that use, but alcohol is a huge problem. Let's not add another problem to it when you're doing that. The one area it's a problem is people drive, and in other states they're drunk and they have marijuana in their system. It makes them even more dangerous. So it's relevant, to discuss that.
The other question for you, and by the way, a lot of these questions, a lot of the answers they're giving and responses are already answering the questions that many of you submitted. But you've heard this argument before. You're a prosecutor. You were formerly a judge, the HOPE program. What about the argument that focusing on people with marijuana really detracts from other more important criminal investigations, and more importantly is overcrowding our jails and prisons with people busted for something that's essentially a non-violent offense?
Okay, nobody goes to prison for marijuana that I'm aware of. I think you look at our public safety records, there's nobody there. We did see somebody recently, he got 30 days for marijuana, but he was selling it in Waikiki. The tourists complain about it, so I'm sure HPD is responding to that. And I think your cartoonist should realize I can chew gum and walk at the same time. So we're very aggressive about going after all these things. Marijuana doesn't take hardly any time for us, no offense, except during the legislative session. I've done all the research before. I'm keeping up with the research, but it doesn't take much time for us to be dealing with that compared to everything else the office does.
Okay, thank you. That's Will Caron, our cartoonist who appears on Sundays. Nikos, it is your turn.
Aloha, thank you for being here. Again, my name is Nikos Leverenz with the Drug Policy Forum of Hawaiʻi. I also served on the Dual Use Cannabis Task Force, and DPFH is also a member of the Hawaii Alliance for Cannabis Reform. Please check us out at legalizehawaii.org. The one thing I want us to remember, three things. One, we have to remember the context here. Cannabis has a 5,000-year record of recorded use for medicinal purposes, going back to China. The human relationship with cannabis goes back probably another 5,000 years to 7,000 years before that. Cannabis was part of the American Pharmacopoeia from 1840 to 1940. And how was it taken out? It was taken out due to the law passed in 1937 and some subsequent laws that really began and instituted the modern war on drugs by a fellow named Harry Anslinger, who headed the Bureau of Narcotics. Despite the fact that cannabis produces significantly less levels of preventable illness, injury, and tobacco and death than tobacco and alcohol. Tobacco causes 400,000 deaths per year. Alcohol causes about 178,000 deaths per year. Cannabis, 0. We've had multiple government commissions since '37 coming out showing that cannabis use for most people does not pose a significant risk to themselves or others in terms of health. Two of them are the LaGuardia Commission in the 40s, in the early 40s, and the Schaefer Commission in 1972. The modern war on cannabis really began with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, where it was deemed a Schedule I substance. The Schaefer Commission basically debunked its inclusion in Schedule I 2 years later. So the debate about today's laws has really been marred by a lack of honest discourse, and it's largely driven by government-funded propaganda that began 50 years ago with Bob DuPont and the National Institute of Drug Abuse. Bob DuPont is one of the most ideological anti-cannabis zealots out there. Bob DuPont also has interests in the drug testing industry, which helps prop up, our criminal legal system and the misuse of drug testing outside of the medical context. We have structures of power within our established medical system who actually opposed taking cannabis out of the pharmacopoeia. The AMA itself said we should not be criminalizing this in the 40s, but eventually they succumbed to government power. So, cannabis prohibition has been a real centerpiece on in the war on drugs, and we have to acknowledge the harms of 5 decades of criminalization in the post-CSA era. It's crowded our jails, it's crowded our courts, it's crowded our systems of supervision, including a probation system here in Hawaii that features the longest average term of probation in the nation, 5 years. This is what you're paying for. Criminalization perpetuates the most severe and lasting stigma that can be done over a person's lifetime. There's a whole host of collateral consequences to a criminal conviction, including employment, housing, access to government services. Cannabis legalization is also here right now. We have currently 24 states that have legalized adult use. Not one of them is going back. Not one. 58% support adult use legalization here in Hawaii, more than Aloha Stadium per the Pacific Resource Partnership report. And the real question here for us today, I believe, is not whether to legalize cannabis, but how best to legalize cannabis. And it's really time to kind of discard the bunk of yesterday. I know that opponents of adult use legalization are grasping at an ever diminishing number of straws. But let's have an honest conversation that's not rooted in the kind of fear and paranoia that has decimated lives for generations, including in our Native Hawaiian community, our Pacifica community, our Black community, and our Filipino community too. We need to recognize and honor, not honor, but bear witness to the harms of criminalization and move toward regulation, move toward a public health approach, and ensure, with respect to teens and children, that they have good, tone-neutral, science-based information on how to make decisions for themselves. And I look forward to the day when this state actually has science-based drug and alcohol information available. Let's empower people to make informed choices about their health and well-being. And to the extent that people move from a harmful substance like alcohol to cannabis, it's a net public health benefit. Teens, if you look at the youth risk behavioral surveillance data over the past decade plus, teen cannabis use rates have been going down, including in legalized adult use states. So unless we're willing to debunk the YRSB data and the whole monitoring the future study data, we are at a juncture here where it's time to move on and turn to page on a failed policy of prohibition.
Okay. Thank you, Nikos. And by the way, I will have two follow-ups for you, and when May and Jerry speak as well, I am going to give each of you an opportunity then to rebut if you wanted to respond to anything you heard earlier. My question's for you. Nikos, we have a decriminalization law right now. If I understand it, it's been on the books 5-6 years now, and you can possess, an adult, 21 years and older, up to 3 grams of marijuana. It is subject to a penalty, though. If HPD wants to crack down, they can do that. My understanding is it's not much enforced at all. I don't know if that is the case. Why not just stay with the decrim? 3 grams for someone 21. Why go with total legalization?
Well, we got statistics from the Department of Justice, and there are hundreds of people, adults and juveniles, as of 3 years ago, still being arrested for cannabis.
Is that national data or what?
Local data,
okay.
County by county data that's collected for the Uniform Crime Report. And if we look over the span of decades, we find that many thousands of adults and many thousands of juveniles have been arrested for cannabis. In fact, cannabis prohibition is often the gateway into the criminal legal system for children from under-resourced communities. And it's time to end. To put an end to that. Nobody wants to harm children, nobody. Yet what we hear from the other side is a wanton refusal to at least bear witness to the harm that cannabis prohibition has caused upon people and their families for across generations even. So, 3 grams is a really Manini amount. I call HB 1383 the Manini decrim bill. If we're going to decriminalize, we should decriminalize at least half an ounce, preferably be up to an ounce. But we have somebody here who calls even the expansion of decriminalization the Drug Dealer Empowerment Act. No, not at all, not the case. So, decrim only, it's better than nothing. It's better than, a 5-year prison sentence at the outset and a large fine. But progress is possible. We saw this with Senator Roz Baker, who used to be the head of this Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. She eventually came around to adult use legalization, so long as there are clear and enforceable regulations.
Okay. Second question, where are we at the federal level with Schedule I marijuana, same classification as heroin, LSD, ecstasy, if I have that correct? I understand there has been some movement at the federal level to remove marijuana from the Schedule I.
It's currently in flux. The Biden White House and the HHS directed the DEA to schedule it down to Schedule III, but to be frank, and I think we need to be very clear on this, cannabis does not belong in the Controlled Substances Act at all. It didn't belong there 50 years ago, and it certainly doesn't belong there now. If you look at the prong criteria of cannabis, relative harm, accepted medical use, dependence, cannabis scores very low on all of those metrics, and it should be relegated and regulated and relegated to a status like alcohol, where it is totally outside of the context of the Controlled Substances Act.
Thank you, Nikos. Jerry, take us to the medical realm, Burns Medical School.
Thank you very much, and it's a privilege to be here today. I have found the argument for cannabis legalization to be compelling and cogent. Now, that doesn't mean I'm convinced, but I do disagree with a couple of points.
And if I could, Jerry, just ask you to speak a little bit more directly into the mic.
How's this?
Perfect.
All right, thank you very much. So the first thing that seems to be a point of disagreement, even the word honesty was used, was does recreational cannabis legalization increase use in those states that it's legalized among youth? I had heard there was an article or statement by Dr. Nora Volkow, who's the head of NIDA. So when I started my career as a trainee in psychiatry almost 40 years ago in 1987, there was a young assistant professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center where I trained named Nora Volkow. And this, unfortunately, has not given me direct access to her. She was doing research at the time with a famous psychopharmacologist named Leo Hollister, who had done some of the original experiments with Ken Kesey on LSD. And she was doing research on PET scans of people that were using cocaine and defining the basic structures in the brain that were involved in addiction, which happened to be in the midbrain. So I have on and off tried to contact her over the years, and I'm always referred to her assistant, Ruben Baylor. So I emailed Ruben Baylor and I said, hey, what's this situation? What's Dr. Volkow? Is she saying that youth in states with RCL, recreational marijuana legalization, are not affected by it? And they sent an email back It wasn't, oh, it says, "Hello, Jerry Busch." I thought, well, this is a personal email. It's better than ChatGPT or something like that. On behalf of Dr. Ruben Baylor, thank you for contacting National Institute on Drug Abuse. So I'll be happy to forward this email in another article or two. But the bottom line is what NIDA and Dr. Volkow are saying, and what is absolutely correct, is that medicinal, I guess that combines medicinal and cannabis. Medicinal cannabis legalization has not been linked to increased use among adolescents in states that have legalized medicinal marijuana. There's no increase. Most studies so far indicate that non-medical cannabis legalization has not led to an increase in past year cannabis use among adolescents. However, a more recent 2024 meta-analysis, this is a study of all the different studies in states that have legalized marijuana. And this study is in the November 2024 Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. I know most of the audience already reads this journal regularly, but I'll go ahead and forward the article so it can be attached for people's reference, because it gives a pretty simple summary at the beginning. But it says that there was a modest increase in past month use among young people, with greater increases for young adults than adolescents in states that legalized non-medicinal marijuana, so recreational marijuana. That's the most recent data. The next thing I wanted to do was just to say that we don't really have the resources in our state to treat people who become addicted to marijuana. When you tell somebody or ask someone who's using marijuana if they're addicted to it, no matter if they're addicted or not, they're going to say, "No, I'm not addicted." So for everybody using marijuana, I would challenge you to stop using it for a period of time and see how you feel. Originally, about a third of people who use marijuana regularly become addicted, but with more recent increases in potency, and Steve went over those, so I'm not going to bore you with them, but cannabis is incredibly more potent now than it used to be. 2/3 of people become addicted, and I'm going to spend a minute when I can going over the signs of cannabis addiction, because part of managing this whole situation, whether we have recreational cannabis legalization or not, is educating the public on what does this look like. Now, what informs my opinion? When I came to Hawaii from Texas in 2019, the first work that I did was at the H4 clinic with Dr. Landeslum on Hotel Street. And while many of the homeless people there had all sorts of different drugs in their system, cannabis was one of them. Eventually, I was transferred to the Queens Psychiatric Emergency Department. And over the years, from 2019 to 2024, when I finished working there, I saw an increase in our population in cannabis-induced psychotic disorder. That was among adults and keiki. And I saw the same in the family treatment center or children's unit in the hospital. I don't have any data on this, and these are anecdotal reports. The second job that I had, besides training residents in the psychiatric emergency room at Queens, was working on the mental health units and training residents at OCCC, where I, in 4 years, never saw a single person who was in OCCC as a result of a cannabis associated situation. So I'm just not seeing it. The last thing I want to say is that in terms of telling people not to drive when they're high on cannabis, I'm sure they'd be quite agreeable to that. The problem is once they're high on cannabis, whether they're actually going to follow through on that or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I have 3 questions for you. The first is...
Whoa. Everybody else had 2 questions.
I know. I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that. I am not addicted to marijuana. But speaking of addiction, can you give an example, 1 or 2 signs that illustrate addiction to marijuana?
There's 11 diagnostic criteria for cannabis use disorder. And this is something that both people in favor of RCL and people against RCL and everyone in the audience should be aware of. This is part of the basic public health education that's missing. How would families and how might people know? So there's 11 criteria for substance use disorder. I'm not going to take a long time to answer because I know you have a couple other questions. But using more cannabis than intended or for longer periods of time than planned. Persistent desire or unsuccessful attempts to cut down or control use. I saw a girl the other day and she was crying because she was addicted to vape, cannabis, or THC, and experienced this and was very frustrated and distressed. Spending a lot of time obtaining, using, and recovering from cannabis. Craving or a strong desire to use cannabis. Failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home due to cannabis use. Continued use despite social or interpersonal problems. Giving up or reducing important activities. There's several more criteria, but I'm happy. But 2 of those are necessary for mild cannabis use disorder, 3 to 4 for moderate, and 5 or over are used to diagnose severe cannabis use disorder or what's called cannabis addiction.
Okay, second of 3 questions. If I heard you correctly, at your opening, you said something about there were compelling and cogent arguments for recreational marijuana. Did I hear you correctly?
No, I don't think so.
Third question.
But what I meant was I enjoyed the opening statement from our legislator because I found it to be compelling and coherent. If I didn't disagree with some of the points that were embedded in it, I could see why he's a very good orator and statesman.
Okay.
And I would vote for him if I lived on the Big Island.
Coherent, not cogent. My last question for you.
Is that a partisan statement? I retract my last statement.
Question. There is medical cannabis. How come there's not medical alcohol or medical tobacco?
I think you may have hit on some new cottage industries there. Why not? Both alcohol and cannabis have medical effects and have been used for medical purposes. Who hasn't seen an old Western where someone was given some alcohol prior to having their head amputated, or a World War II movie where a prisoner wasn't given a cigarette before they're executed? But they do have strong pharmacological effects. But like a lot of other controlled substances, they sort of backfire when you amplify them through a commercial process.
Okay. No, thank you. I appreciate you answering those questions. Not to save you to last, but I do want to make sure. I may have actually said the name of your clinic incorrectly. Is it? Go ahead and tell me the name of it, please.
So the name of our clinic is Malie Cannabis Clinic. Malie is a word that, so throughout Polynesia, we have shared words, right? Like ulu, ava. Malie is a shared word that is in Samoan, Hawaiian, and Tongan, and it means to be calm, to be peaceful. So
Okay.
Malie Cannabis Clinic seemed to fit.
Thank you. If
Yes.
you would just briefly explain what the clinic does, and then, of course, your opening remarks.
So my name is Fuimaono-Poe. I'm a family nurse practitioner. So I am a certifying provider. I'm also a longtime cannabis activist. I've spent probably the past 30 years really advocating for cannabis. I worked with Jack Herrera and Dennis Perone, who, if you don't know who they are, they're really the fathers of the modern day cannabis movement in the United States, with both medical cannabis use and hemp. And currently, I have a clinic. We do certifications. I also work for HPD. So if you are arrested, me or my team get to do an assessment, and I do occupational health. So I have a pretty large practice and see a lot of different types of folks in different situations. But when it comes to cannabis, I am incredibly pro medical cannabis, but despite all of that, I really don't support the commercialization efforts for cannabis in the state of Hawaii at this time. And I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit about the reason for the why. And sorry, I'm going to use my notes. I was working at HPD until midnight last night, so it might be a little punchy, so pardon me using my notes. We all agree that the war on drugs has failed. However, really through the efforts of some of the people on this panel, Nikos, Senator Aspero, I think I saw him earlier, and the decrim bill, arrests have decreased significantly in the state of Hawaii. In 2018, it was 965. In 2023, it was 167. And we saw testimony this week that in 2024, it was about 46. For a population of 1.4 million, I would say that arrests related to cannabis aren't necessarily a problem right at this time. Keeping cannabis medical and expanding the program is really one of the safest things that we can do right now, especially in this uncertainty with what's going on federally. Our new AG, Pam Bondi, is incredibly anti-cannabis, and what we've seen with commercialization, it has consistently overpromised and underdelivered. Hawaii is very different. We have a lot of unique environmental, social, and cultural considerations. And recreational cannabis really has only been around since 2016. So we're looking at less than 10 years of data. When it comes to doing robust data, 10 years isn't a very long time. When California changed Prop 214 to 69, Prop 69, which is basically recreational cannabis, it has literally been fraught with problems, and the people in the legislature have spent the past decade really working to change rules. The argument for cannabis, for legalizing it in a recreational way when it comes to access, it's going to create more access, but for our patients, we would probably see a decrease in access. About 20% of Hawaii's medical cannabis patients use the dispensaries. The rest of the patients grow or get from the legacy market. And with the recreational bills, what we see is a decrease in people's rights to grow cannabis. And we would see that in all of the legalization bills. the one this session gives you 10 plants, no matter what, no matter how many people live with you, no matter how many cards. And if you wanted to grow more, you'd have to require special licensing. Most people who use it medicinally use it in different ways, and some require higher concentrations. So safety, I want to address safety. So we hear this again and again and again, that the dispensaries are the only places that provide safe cannabis because it's tested. In the state of Hawaii, anybody can go and get their cannabis tested, and a lot of our local growers do utilize that. And I wanted to do a quick closing with the rumors about cannabis and fentanyl. So we hear this a lot, that that black market, legacy markets, that they are lacing cannabis with fentanyl. There's really only been one case of it, and that was in New York. And it was believed that it was actually cross contamination from the lab. So it was the lab contained cannabis and fentanyl, and it was contamination and not an actual case. The DEA and SAMHSA really haven't published any data on that because it doesn't exist. And if cannabis were to get, if fentanyl were to get into cannabis, because how cannabis is used, the fentanyl would be completely burnt out. So anytime heat is applied to fentanyl, it becomes inactivated. Also, if it were to be, same with vaporization and same with edibles. So in closing, keeping cannabis in medical use solves the majority of the issues, and it keeps our state safe with just some of the current federal issues that we might be facing. As a medical professional right now, I'm more concerned with the CDC stripping, information about STIs and birth control than recreational cannabis, to be frankly honest at this point. But I just think keeping it medical for now is a really safe way for our state to proceed and to expand our program.
Okay, thank you, May. By the way, I think Elon Musk actually has smoked marijuana in public. Two questions for you. Just, I respect that you feel strongly in support of medical cannabis. Give me the most compelling reason why we should not have recreational.
So I think when we look at recreational cannabis, right, are you talking...
Well, we have decriminalization on the books.
Yes, we have decriminalization.
The bill is for recreational.
Specifically for Hawaii?
Yes, 21 and older, yeah.
So for recreational cannabis, it's really expanding it for tourists. Local people use cannabis, they have access. We can't get tourists to stop touching turtles and monk seals. How do we expect for them to actually not smoke cannabis in public and to not create more of a nuisance?
Huh.
Maybe if they use the cannabis, they'll be disabled from being able to go touch the turtles.
So really what we're looking at is recreational cannabis is for the tourists.
Interesting.
Local people, they have access.
Yeah, I know Steve wants to jump in because he has something to say about tourism, but let's hold off for just a moment. My second question for you, this is from the audience, and maybe this is putting a lot on you, but what are the major reasons why the war on drugs has failed? Why has it failed?
So I would say especially when it comes to cannabis or really any substance, it hasn't stopped it. It's incredibly expensive, and what we see is it ruining lives of the people who are affected by it. Criminalizing substances has never stopped people from using them.
Okay. I know Steve wants to say something, but in interest of respecting the order that we went in, I do want to give each of you the opportunity to respond to something that you heard earlier that you may disagree with. And David, we'll start with you, and then Steve.
Thank you. I think it's important for people to do their own research and understand what the studies actually say and read some of the other researchers that critique those studies. And I think it's important to look at the Center for Disease Control, University of Michigan's Monitoring the Future report that actually looked at the states that have legalized and where they've shown clearly that teen marijuana use has dropped significantly. The percent of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders who report cannabis is fairly easy or very easy to get has dropped dramatically. We need to focus on the facts. I think the report that was referenced earlier doesn't use most recent information. It doesn't include 23 and 24, the first years after the COVID shutdown. So we have to be careful about what we're hearing. I want to mention that it is important to educate adults about how to use cannabis safely. And states that have legalized have education programs to try to make sure that adults do not drive when they're stoned. And we have to really make sure that it is something that we can empower. In the new program, in the bill that we have, it includes a significant funding to assist police officers to do field sobriety tests to determine if an individual is impaired.
This is the legislation that is
This is the legislation that is pending at the legislature. While the House bill is no longer under consideration, the Senate bill is. So the bill is alive, it's moving forward. In the bill, it has specific funding for drug recognition experts. There is no specific test that you can take to determine whether a person is impaired because of cannabis use. It may determine that it's present in an individual system, but it doesn't show that they're impaired. The focus needs to be on impaired driving. And it's not just cannabis, prescription drugs, lack of sleep, distracted driving. I mean, there's a number of reasons why people are impaired. So that what we're trying to do is to focus on helping the police do their job. I want to also mention that, people talk about, the cannabis of today is so much more powerful than cannabis of years ago. Years ago, you could always get hash. Hash is very potent. So I think it's important for people to recognize that what we're hearing from the opposition is really carefully framed arguments that really seek to infuse fear. I am imploring, study the issue and listen carefully and make sure that you're making a wise decision. And so I'll leave it at that, but I think that there's other things that I would like to rebut, but out of deference to others.
Yeah, we may have time for that. This is, if you guys are in agreement with me, this is terrific. This is very helpful, very substantive, and you are answering the questions. Steve, I can't help but mention the name of that cartoon was called Don't Fear the Reefer. But I do know you want to respond as well to what you heard earlier.
Right. The police officers using drug detection techniques on the side of the road goes to probable cause. There is no way a judge is going to convict somebody based on a police officer moving, a little light or something with their eyes. It's just a fantasy. And saying that all these protections are built into it, it's not realistic. Police officers citing people on the sidewalk for smoking is not realistic. When you cite somebody, even if they give you their correct name, say in Waikiki, they don't have IDs on them, but even if you got the right name, a month or two later, a police officer is not going to be able to identify anyone if it goes to trial. But worse than that, that officer would have to take that joint into their custody, put it in an evidence bag, drive down to the police department, put it in evidence. It then goes to the crime lab, who's busy getting recertified, doing DNA, checking guns, checking methamphetamine, to spend time testing for weed. The police officers down in Chinatown, when they run into somebody with a beer, we don't advertise it, but they just tell them to pour it out, because they don't want to have to take it into custody, take it to HPD, and prove that it's alcohol. And so, yes, back in the day, there was hash, but the common thing was smoking weed, was smoking flower. It wasn't used nearly as much as hash, but I think it brings up a good idea. The marijuana of today looks a lot more like the strength of hashish was today. That's what these guys are smoking. When they're getting concentrates of 95%, that's what they're getting. And the whole thing with tourism, that this came as a total surprise to me when I'm looking into it. I talked to Ted Kubo, who runs JTB Japan Travel Bureau. They bring in 500,000 tourists a year. He's afraid that if we legalize marijuana and you smell it all over, we're going to lose a lot of the Japanese tourists. Because in Japan, the stigma they see marijuana as the same as cocaine and methamphetamine. It's a huge deal. It hurts performers if they get caught with marijuana. The last thing we need to do is put our tourist industry at more risk to do that. So I think we have real concerns about that. So HPD, this is not going to help them. They can't test for it. And even if they could ever get marijuana in a bloodstream, there's no agreement on what would lead to it. So and right now, if somebody's weaving all over the road and the police officer stops them, they failed a field sobriety test, they get arrested for DUI, they go down to the station and they blow zeros, they have to let them go. They know they're under the influence of something, but they have to let them go, unless the driving is so bad you could charge them with reckless driving, which is really rare. So I appreciate the chance to respond.
Absolutely. And Nikos, we are in the rebuttal phase.
Sure. I wanted to go over a few things. With respect to the opposition to the commercialization of cannabis, one of the strengths of this bill is that it does incorporate a craft cannabis model, which includes farmers in rural areas and other parts of this island and elsewhere being able to be licensed and regulated and provide direct-to-consumer sales. So that sort of obviates the overt sort of mass commercialization of cannabis, which might happen actually if the federal government changes its tune on scheduling and authorizes a national marketplace. So we have the opportunity, to take the legacy growers and to bring them into the commercial marketplace. But yes, there's always the risk of corporate capture. In terms of the medical cannabis regulations, we still do not have employment protections for medical cannabis patients, as is the case in many other states. We still don't have science-based, harm reduction-based materials like, say the Canadian Nurses Association has put out with Canada having legalized in 2018. And with respect to tourism, data shows that the year after California legalized, Japanese tourism went up. The vast majority of our tourism comes from the Western United States, and that is where cannabis is predominantly legal. So let's really get real. Let's stop fear mongering. Gay marriage is not legal in Japan. People come here from Japan to get married. That didn't put the kibosh on that. Let's give individuals a choice. This is fundamentally about, individuals being free to choose a substance that is, in fact, less harmful than alcohol. And in terms of the higher potency, people have to start low, go slow, find out what works for them. 1 puff might be enough, 2 puffs might be enough. And with respect to some of the negative impacts that we've seen in some of the emergency department referrals, is this regulated flower? What kind of product is it? We have kind of almost like a Wild West landscape out there with multi strains and increased dosing. Let's get this under control. Let's regulate it. Let's reduce access to our younger people, and let's provide consumers with the information regarding potency and safety that they deserve. Mahalo.
Thank you, Nikos. Jerry, your turn. Is there anything that you wanted to respond to that you've heard?
Well, first of all, I notice I object to us being called the opposition. I'd prefer the term naysayers. And secondly, we're being accused of saying things to infuse fear. I prefer to view it as saying things to infuse terror, because it's a terrifying situation from my perspective. I did want to comment on the war on drugs. this is a really antiquated term. I think it may have been invented by President Nixon, but one of the committees I was on in Houston, it was the mayor's anti-drug task force, involved former Mayor Lee Brown. He was a drug czar, and then General McCaffrey, who really objected to the term war on drugs. He had been a veteran of 3 wars and changed the policy of the ONDCP to get away from the notion of war on drugs. And by 2011, when Gil Kurlikowski was the drug czar, he completely prohibited any reference. Now, I also want to say something about getting arrested or being imprisoned for substance use, trafficking, or some sort of associated behavior. Being a drug addict is not against the law. In 1962, the Supreme Court ruled that addiction was not a reason, and there was a law in California that was overturned. So being addicted is not illegal. Trafficking, or for people that use methamphetamine, sometimes their behavior or other sorts of intoxication, they get arrested. Many of the people that I work with in OCCC told me that getting arrested was the one thing that prevented them from the next phase of their trajectory, which was death. And the last thing I want to say in terms of that and reference was an article that Dr. Lam brought to my attention in the latest issue of JAMA. And here's more terror mongering. Cannabis use disorder emergency department visits and hospitalizations and 5-year mortality. So this is February 6, 2025. I'll attach this article for study. Since rather than the opposition, I feel in a way we're all on the same side, because you guys need to be up on the latest, and monitoring the future, by the way, is not the latest. So what this article found is that people who wound up having emergency department visits for cannabis use disorder had a higher rate of death than they had an increased risk of death over people that didn't have cannabis use disorder. Those deaths were from things like suicides or driving accidents or that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. And May, anything that you wanted to say in response to what you've heard?
So it's a lot of things going on. So I wanted to say about monitoring the future. Cannabis use is not down in only recreational states and adolescents. Cannabis use is down nationwide. And I think that this is more of a reflection of parenting styles and how, we've changed the way we parent our children. So I just wanted to say that I don't think recreational cannabis made adolescents decrease cannabis use.
Okay, please continue, please.
And when we look, I wanted to touch on driving because this came up last session. It was probably one of the biggest things when it comes to safety and a safety concern. So I did a little bit of a deep dive, and probably when we look at data, British Columbia, Canada, they have probably some of the best and most robust data out there when it comes to driving. Well, really anything with cannabis, because it's all public, right? So post-commercialization in British Columbia, their drivers who tested positive for THC doubled, and injuries was a 223% increase. When it was combined with alcohol, even more. But the people that we're seeing this in is older people and younger people. When it comes to people who chronically use cannabis, so we're talking, like our average medical cannabis patient in the state of Hawaii, 50 years old, uses it for medical use. There's really no changes in field sobriety tests. So cannabis alone has minimal probably effects on chronic users, but older people and younger people is really where more of the concern is. And it's true with HPD, there is no true way to test for impairment. It's impossible, even when people, and it's a majority of what we see is people who are drunk and driving. When they come in, they've done field sobriety, they bring them in, and, they can refuse to blow. So, when we're looking at some of these cannabis and driving policies, it's really, it's complicated. Like everything with this plant, it's complicated. The way it works is complicated. So yeah, those are kind of the two main things that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you, May. We're in the final stretch here, less than 15 minutes. I want to get quickly to some topics that probably could go on at length in terms of discussion, but we haven't talked about the revenue picture. One of the main arguments for recreational marijuana, for that matter, the medical cannabis industry, for that matter, the hemp industry, is making money off of it and taxing it. David, I thought we'd start with you, and anybody could jump in. What are the figures that you've seen nationally in terms of revenue picture, even anecdotally?
I was looking to see if I printed out. We did get the tax department estimates for revenue, but I don't have them with me.
That's all right. One of our questioners actually said, maybe you could use that revenue to pay for free school lunches.
So I think it's important to, take a look at the bill, and you can see what those of us that crafted the bill focus where the money should be going. And it does include significant funding that would go to support public education, and it would also go to support the regulatory office itself, of course, but also would support enforcement on preventing organized crime and money laundering, which are the ones that really would be the big out-of-state folks coming in and trying to take over and, start these large illegal grow operations. And I think it's important for us to provide more funding, and I'm proposing that funding from the cannabis taxes would go to support programs for the youth, so they have something to do, so that when we say don't smoke cannabis, they got other things they can do. Kids want to do stuff, right? So we want to be able to support programs, facilities and programs for youth in communities. So the funding, I think, is, right now there is a study being done through the existing medical cannabis office to look at the projected demand that might occur if there is legalization, and then we can use that, and the tax department is going to help us figure out what the potential revenue sources will, potential revenue amounts will be. I do want to mention, though, that we talked about our friends at the end of the couch here said that they referenced Nora.
His name is
Volko.
Steve.
Well, no, there was not just Steve.
Friends may be too strong a word.
Jerry.
It's not just. It's not. So Nora Volko, this person that they had brought up, the National Institute of Drug Abuse director, she testified in the 2022 U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing and said, quote, legalization by some states of marijuana has not been associated with an increase in adolescents' marijuana use. You got that? She said legalization by some states of marijuana has not been associated with an increase in adolescents' marijuana use. Look at the data, okay? I think it's very important. Yes, youth use of cannabis has gone down across the board, but legalization doesn't cause an increase in use by minors. That's what the data shows from the legalization states. So look at the data. Fatal crashes that are caused by people who have that is caused by people who are impaired because of cannabis has not gone up in states that have legalized. Usually people who are involved in fatal crashes have a whole bunch of different drugs in their system, alcohol included, and cannabis would be included, but it's not something that is cannabis direct causation to impaired driving causing fatal crashes. So be discerning when you look at the studies that are being quoted here.
Okay. Thank you, David. Nikos, and then Steve.
Yeah, very quickly on the revenue issue. I believe when DOTAX was offering testimony to the Joint Committee in the House, they projected tens of millions in foreseeable tax revenue, almost out of the gate, ever increasing. I also encourage people to look at a state like New Mexico, which recently legalized. They had a more open and too unrestricted, maybe, licensing system. But in their first year of operations, they saw $300 million in gross sales and $27 million in tax revenue. So I just wanted to also, really counter this notion that, we don't criminalize behavioral health issues and substance use right now, because, we can float the Robinson decision. We have, if you possess any amount of non-cannabis drugs, that's in Schedule 1 and in Schedule 2, I believe, 5 years in prison, $10,000 fine. And that kind of leads to a very bloated probation system. So the contention that we're not criminalizing behavioral health and poverty in our society is a really myopic posture that doesn't really reflect the reality that so many of our folks and our families from under-resourced communities face. And, it's nice to see the American Public Health Association and the American Medical Association call for decriminalization and removing substance use from the criminal legal system, and instead offering treatment opportunities for people who need it, as in the case of alcohol. If there are negative impacts from use, there will be consequences for those actions, but use alone should not be a trigger for negative criminal consequences.
Okay, thank you, Nikos.
I found the data.
Yes, David.
All right, the Department of Taxation estimated cannabis tax, the net tax gain after you pay for the programs that we have. The net tax gain that is just the taxation. It doesn't, in 26, let's say we started January 1st, 2026, first year, 4.3 million. 27, 20.5 million. In 2028, 26.8 million. 2029, 33 million. 2030, 39.3 million. And 2031, 40.5 million. So that's the estimate. I know the prosecutor says, well, why are we profiting on people who are addicted? These are people who are adults who are making their own choice, and we should provide them with the freedom to buy cannabis that is tested and safe. This is a public safety and consumer protection bill, and it works to make sure we protect the youth, okay? So it's public safety, public education. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
And the black
Microphone.
The black market has not gone away in any state that has legalized it because it's always cheaper. People are comfortable going there. I'm glad to hear Nora Volkow is getting so much attention, but you go to the National Institute of Drug Abuse and her blog on January 14 of 2025 bears it out that she looks at the National Survey on Drug Use and Health reported that between 2012 2019 past year use of cannabis among people 12 and older rose from 11% to over 17%. And then she talked about the problems with methodology, and in 2022, 22% of people had used the drug in the past year. Very steep increases are also being seen in the number of people 65 and over who use cannabis. People older, like me, are worried about falling, and smoking marijuana has increased that. So it's, I think you might find a recent article by two of the top researchers in drug policy, Jonathan Calkins of Carnegie Mellon and Keith Humphreys of Stanford. They wrote in The Atlantic, legal weed didn't deliver on its promises. So when it comes to how much money states make, and again, it's on the addicts, the one commonality, it's never as much as people predict it as when they try to sell it. It is never as much.
Okay.
Thank you.
We are, I believe, almost out of time here. I do want Jerry and May to have a final comment, and then I have a final comment or two. Let me just clarify. I have, in fact, read all the questions, and many of them have been answered today. So please don't feel slighted if I didn't get to your question. But it's been a very, I think, thorough and comprehensive discussion. But Jerry and May, if you have a final comment, please chime in now.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone here. I greatly appreciate it, and I appreciate what everyone on the panel has said today. My question for the audience to leave with is, what message does it send to Keiki to have legalization of recreational marijuana? Thank you.
Thank you. May.
So I just want to say thanks again for the opportunity with Civil Beat. We have access to cannabis here in the state. Adults are able to choose to use cannabis here. We have very little arrests and very little issues when it comes to incarceration, when it comes to cannabis. I would like to see an expansion of the medical program here, an expansion of licenses. The existing 8 licenses were only supposed to be for a couple of years. It was a pilot program. All of the focus has been on recreational and commercialization as opposed to really building the foundation for a strong medical program, which was really the intention of these original bills and really the intention of compassionate cannabis use. That's where it came from. For it wasn't, for recreational, ever. Cannabis is a medicine, and I would like to see our program get strengthened.
Thank you very much. I'm going to end on this note. SB 1613 will be heard, as I said, next Wednesday. There will be no testimony. As I understand it, it is decision-making only, but I believe that's correct, isn't it? Written testimony, thank you, not public. But it would, if the bill does pass WHAM and consumer protection and the Senate floor, it does go back over to the House, and you still have the opportunity to weigh in because the House would take it up again per David. It would be in his committee, among others. And I do encourage all of you who want to weigh in, hopefully with a lot of informed facts behind it based on today's remarks from our guest. And I do want to say, please, a big round of applause for our guest today.